The flight attendant's smug smiles vanished when the presidential seal gleamed on Terrence's ID. Seconds earlier, they'd mocked him, a black man carrying a crying infant alone in first class. Now, wide-eyed, they stared at the badge identifying him as the president's chief security advisor. Before I dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling. The story I'm about to share will leave you questioning everything about how we judge others based on appearance alone. Terrence Jackson was no ordinary passenger boarding Delta Flight 2376 from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta that fateful Friday afternoon. At 38 years old, his impressive 6'2" frame carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 15 years as a Navy SEAL before transitioning to government security work. What most people didn't know, including the flight crew who would soon humiliate him, was that Terrence had recently been appointed as the presidential chief security advisor after single-handedly thwarting a major terrorist plot targeting multiple U.S. embassies. The appointment had been kept relatively quiet for security reasons. Only those with the highest clearance levels were aware that this black man with closely cropped hair and intense brown eyes was now responsible for coordinating protection strategies for the most powerful person in the free world. Today, however, Terrence wasn't thinking about national security protocols or terrorist threats. After an exhausting 72-hour work week filled with classified briefings and emergency contingency planning, he was focused solely on getting home to Atlanta to see his wife Amara, who had been understanding but increasingly concerned about the toll his new position was taking on their relationship. Just one more flight, Terrence whispered to the sleeping 3-month-old baby girl nestled against his broad chest. His sister Jasmine had unexpectedly needed emergency gallbladder surgery, and her husband David was overseas on a business trip that couldn't be cancelled. When Jasmine called from the hospital, Terrence didn't hesitate to offer to bring baby Zora home to Atlanta himself. "I've handled hostage negotiations in 3 different languages. One tiny baby should be manageable," he joked to his sister. Now, carefully supporting Zora's delicate head while juggling a diaper bag in his carry-on, Terrence wasn't feeling quite so confident. Unlike his typical workdays where he wore crisp suits and polished shoes, today Terrence was dressed in dark jeans and a plain navy blue t-shirt. He'd rushed straight from a classified briefing to the hospital to pick up Zora, without time to change into more formal attire. The casual clothes were a rare departure from his usual professional appearance. Something that would soon play a significant role in how others perceived him. Throughout his distinguished career, Terrence had faced discrimination despite his impressive credentials. From being pulled over driving his own luxury car in his own neighborhood to being questioned about his presence in high-security areas despite wearing his credentials, he'd learned to carry himself with a dignified restraint that his father had taught him was necessary for a black man in America. "Never let them see your anger, son," his father Franklin had told him repeatedly. "The moment you show emotion is the moment they stop seeing you as professional." Those words had served him well during his military career and even more so in his government positions, but they also meant swallowing countless indignities that his white colleagues never experienced. As Terrence approached the gate agent, a young white woman named Brittany, he allowed himself to hope that this journey would be smooth. Baby Zora was sleeping peacefully, and his first-class ticket, a perk of his new position, meant he would board first and have space to settle in with the infant. "Good afternoon, sir," Brittany said with a genuine smile, checking his boarding pass. "First class, seat 2A. Would you like to pre-board with the little one?" "That would be great, thank you," Terrence replied, shifting Zora gently as she stirred slightly. "She's beautiful," Brittany commented. "Your daughter?" "My niece, actually. I'm bringing her home to her mom who's recovering from surgery." "That's so sweet of you. We'll begin boarding in about 10 minutes, but you're welcome to go ahead now if you'd like." This pleasant interaction gave Terrence hope. Perhaps this would be one of those rare occasions where he would be seen first as a human being rather than through the lens of racial preconceptions. Unfortunately, as he would soon discover, Brittany's professionalism was not shared by all of her colleagues. As Terrence made his way down the jetway, he mentally prepared for the 4-hour flight ahead. Little did he know that boarding the plane would be just the beginning of an ordeal that would not only test his composure but would eventually spark a national conversation about bias, respect, and the credentials we shouldn't need to be treated with basic human dignity. Terrence stepped onto the aircraft, the familiar smell of recycled air and cleaning products greeting him as he carefully maneuvered down the narrow aisle with baby Zora still sleeping against his chest. The first-class cabin was half empty, with only a few passengers already settled in their spacious seats. He'd chosen this later afternoon flight specifically because it tended to be less crowded, making it easier to travel with an infant. 2 flight attendants stood at the entrance to the cabin, a blonde woman in her mid-30s who would later be identified as Jessica Whitman, and a younger man with perfectly styled hair introduced by his name tag as Kyle Preston. As Terrence approached, their easy conversation halted abruptly. They exchanged a quick glance that Terrence had seen countless times before, a silent communication loaded with assumption and judgment. "Can I help you find your seat?" Jessica asked, her voice carrying a distinct note of suspicion as her eyes darted from Terrence's casual clothes to the sleeping baby and back to his face. "I'm in 2A, Terrence replied calmly, shifting the weight of the diaper bag on his shoulder while keeping Zora steady. Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly. 2A. That's in first class. Yes, I know, Terrence confirmed, maintaining his composure while presenting his boarding pass. Kyle leaned closer to Jessica, not bothering to lower his voice. "These mistakes happen all the time with the new booking system," he said loud enough for the nearest passengers to hear, despite clearly seeing the first class designation on Terrence's boarding pass. Terrence felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the physical manifestation of having to suppress justified anger in the face of prejudice. He took a measured breath and said evenly, "There's no mistake. I'm in seat 2A." As he moved toward his assigned seat, Terrence became acutely aware of the stares from the other first-class passengers, mostly white business travelers in suits or business casual attire. One middle-aged white man in particular, wearing an expensive-looking suit with a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, made a show of watching Terrence over his reading glasses. "Excuse me," the man said, stopping Terrence as he tried to place his carry-on in the overhead compartment while balancing Zora. "Are you sure you're in the right section? First class is quite expensive." "I'm in the right section," Terrence replied, his voice neutral despite the burning sensation rising in his throat. The man, who would later introduce himself as Walter Briggs, executive vice president of a Fortune 500 company, sighed dramatically. "Standards really are slipping these days," he remarked to no one in particular, loud enough for everyone to hear. Terrence finally reached seat 2A, carefully maneuvering to sit down without waking Zora. As he settled in, Jessica appeared beside him. "Sir, I'll need to see your ID again," she said, her tone making it clear this was not a routine request. Terrence shifted Zora to one arm and reached for his wallet with his free hand, a maneuver he'd perfected over the past day of baby care. He handed Jessica his regular driver's license, keeping his government ID secured in a different section of his wallet. Jessica examined the license with unusual scrutiny, turning it over multiple times and holding it up to the light as if checking for forgery. Terrence noticed that none of the white passengers had been asked for secondary ID verification after boarding. "Is there a problem?" he asked quietly. "Just being thorough," Jessica replied without making eye contact. "We need to ensure everyone is in their proper place." The emphasis on proper place wasn't lost on Terrence. It was the kind of coded language he'd heard throughout his life, subtle reminders of boundaries he was presumed to be crossing. The scrutiny and tension began to affect baby Zora, who stirred and then let out a small whimper that quickly escalated to crying. The sudden noise caused several passengers to turn and stare disapprovingly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the economy section," Jessica suggested with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It might be better for everyone." Her gaze flicked meaningfully toward the now crying infant. "I'll be fine right here in my assigned seat, thank you," Terrence replied, gently bouncing Zora while reaching for her pacifier in the diaper bag. Jessica's smile tightened. Well, if you're sure. Though traveling with an infant in first class can be disruptive to our premium customers. The implication was clear. Terrence and baby Zora were being categorized as interlopers in a space where they supposedly didn't belong. It was a familiar scenario for Terrence, but familiarity didn't make it any less degrading. As he attempted to soothe the increasingly upset baby, he knew that this confrontation was far from over. "I've purchased a first-class ticket, and this is my assigned seat," Terrence stated firmly but politely, meeting Jessica's gaze directly while continuing to comfort Zora. "We'll be fine right here." Jessica's mouth formed a tight line as she exchanged another meaningful look with Kyle, who had been hovering nearby during the exchange. With a slight nod, Kyle moved to the front of the cabin and picked up the aircraft phone. "I'm going to call Diane," Kyle said to Jessica, not bothering to lower his voice. "She'll know how to handle this situation." Terrence recognized the tactic immediately: escalation to authority when a black person didn't acquiesce to unfair treatment. He'd seen it countless times, from department stores to traffic stops. Now, while trying to keep a crying baby calm in a public space, he was once again being treated as a problem to be handled. Within minutes, a third flight attendant appeared, Diane Lambert, the head flight attendant according to her name badge. In her late 40s with auburn hair pulled into a severe bun, she carried herself with the authority of someone used to being the final word on disputes. Before Kyle or Jessica had said a single word to her, her expression had already hardened as she assessed Terrence. "What seems to be the issue here?" Diane asked, directing her question to her colleagues rather than to Terrence. "This gentleman is insisting on remaining in first class with an infant," Jessica explained, emphasizing "gentleman" in a way that suggested the opposite. "He's causing a disturbance." Diane turned to Terrence, her expression leaving no doubt that she had already formed her opinion before hearing his side. "Sir, if you're causing a disturbance, I'll have to ask you to either move to another section or deplane." Baby Zora, sensitive to the tension around her, began wailing louder. Terrence tried to maintain his composure while dealing with both the crying infant and the unfair accusation. "I'm not causing any disturbance," he explained calmly. "I have a valid first-class ticket. The only issue seems to be that certain staff members don't believe I belong here." "Don't make this about something it's not," Diane replied dismissively. "This is about the comfort of all our passengers." An upset infant in a confined first-class cabin is disruptive. "Babies cry sometimes," Terrence countered. "That's not a policy violation. If it were, it would be stated in your conditions of carriage, which I've read thoroughly." From across the aisle, a young Asian woman with short black hair had begun discreetly recording the interaction on her phone. Terrence noticed her from the corner of his eye but remained focused on the increasingly hostile confrontation. "Sir, your attitude is becoming problematic," Diane stated, raising her voice slightly. "If you continue to argue, I'll have no choice but to call airport security." "Please do," Terrence replied, his exterior calm belying the storm of emotions beneath. "I've done nothing wrong." From his seat a few rows ahead, Walter Briggs twisted around to interject. "Some people just don't understand that certain spaces have standards," he announced loudly to the cabin. "It's not always about the ticket price. It's about knowing how to conduct oneself appropriately." The coded racism in Briggs' statement hung in the air. A few passengers nodded in agreement while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Terrence felt a familiar cocktail of humiliation and anger rising within him. Throughout his distinguished career, from the Naval Academy where he'd graduated with honors, through his SEAL training where he'd finished top of his class, to his current position advising the president, he'd endured similar indignities. The only difference was that now he had a crying baby in his arms, making it even harder to maintain the stoic demeanor his father had taught him was necessary for survival as a black man in America. "My conduct is perfectly appropriate," Terrence responded evenly. "What's inappropriate is the treatment I'm receiving based solely on assumptions about who I am and where I belong." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Walter scoffed. Always making everything about race when it's clearly about behavior. Diane raised her hand as if to silence further discussion. That's enough. I'm calling security. She turned and walked briskly to the aircraft phone, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. As Terrence gently rocked Zora, trying to calm her with soothing whispers, he caught fragments of other passengers' conversations. Can't they control their children? This is why I usually fly private. First class isn't what it used to be. Each comment was a small cut, adding to the thousands he'd endured over his lifetime. Yet even as he felt the familiar weight of these microaggressions, a part of him remained in analytical mode. The part trained to assess threats and respond strategically. He knew that showing anger would only confirm their biases. Leaving would be an admission of wrongdoing. His options were limited, especially with a baby depending on him. As he waited for the security officer Diane had summoned, Terrence's mind flashed back to other moments of discrimination. Being followed in high-end stores, being asked if he was lost when walking in affluent neighborhoods, being questioned about his credentials even when wearing his military uniform. Each time, he'd been forced to prove he belonged, to justify his existence in spaces others entered without question. Now, holding his sister's baby on what should have been a routine flight home, he was once again being forced to defend his right to occupy space. The irony wasn't lost on him. That the man responsible for securing the President of the United States was being treated as a security threat himself. Within minutes, a uniformed airport security officer boarded the plane. Officer James Reeves, a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, moved with the measured confidence of someone who had handled numerous aircraft disputes over his 20-year career. Diane immediately approached him, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward Terrence. That passenger is being disruptive and refusing to comply with crew instructions, she explained, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Officer Reeves nodded professionally and made his way toward Terrence, who continued to comfort the now whimpering Zora. As the officer drew closer, his stern expression suddenly shifted. A flash of recognition crossed his face, followed by visible confusion. "Mr. Jackson?" Officer Reeves asked, his authoritative tone giving way to uncertainty. Terrence looked up, momentarily surprised at hearing his name. It took him a second to place the officer's face, but then recognition dawned. Officer Reeves had been present at a classified security briefing the previous week, where Terrence had presented new protocols for presidential travel. "Officer Reeves," Terrence acknowledged with a slight nod, aware that every eye in the first-class cabin was now fixed on this unexpected exchange. Officer Reeves straightened his posture instinctively. "Sir, I wasn't aware you were the passenger in question. There seems to be some misunderstanding." Diane stepped forward, confusion evident on her face. "You know this man?" Officer Reeves hesitated, clearly uncertain about how much to reveal in this public setting. "Yes, I do." Terrence realized that the situation had reached a critical juncture. While he hated that it would take his credentials rather than his humanity to be treated with respect, he also recognized the need to resolve the situation for Zora's sake. With a resigned sigh, he shifted the baby slightly and reached for his wallet again, this time retrieving his government ID with its distinctive presidential seal. "Perhaps this will clarify things," Terrence said quietly, handing the ID to Diane rather than continuing to argue his case. As Diane examined the ID, her expression transformed dramatically. The gold presidential seal gleamed under the cabin lights, and the designation, Chief Presidential Security Advisor, was prominently displayed alongside Terrence's photograph and credentials clearance level. I. Diane stammered, her face flushing deep red. Jessica and Kyle, who had been hovering nearby throughout the confrontation, moved closer to see what had caused Diane's sudden change in demeanor. When they glimpsed the presidential seal and Terrence's title, their expressions shifted from smug certainty to shocked horror. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The atmosphere in the cabin changed instantly. Walter Briggs, who had been vocally supporting the crew's treatment of Terrence, suddenly became intensely interested in his laptop screen, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Other passengers who had been staring disapprovingly at Terence now quickly averted their gazes, some pretending to be absorbed in magazines or their phones. Did you just witness how quickly respect was given once Terence's ID was revealed? Comment number 1 if you think people should be treated with dignity regardless of their credentials. Hit that like button if you've ever seen someone's attitude change when they discovered who they were really talking to. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose the prejudice hiding behind policy enforcement. What do you think will happen next? Will the crew face consequences for their actions, or will they try to sweep this incident under the rug? Officer Reeves, recognizing the sensitivity of the situation, positioned himself slightly in front of Terence in a subtle protective stance. "Everything appears to be in order here," he announced to the crew. "Mr. Jackson is exactly where he's supposed to be." Diane quickly handed the ID back to Terence, her previously authoritative demeanor completely evaporated. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Of course you're welcome in first class. We're honored to have you aboard." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Terence replied calmly, returning his ID to his wallet. "It was an assumption based on how I look while holding this baby." The young Asian woman who had been recording the incident from across the aisle continued to do so, capturing the dramatic shift in the crew's behavior. Terence noticed her slight nod of solidarity. At that moment, the aircraft door opened again, and the flight captain emerged from the cockpit, having been notified of a potential security situation. Captain Alexander Davis, a tall man with the confident bearing of a former military pilot, surveyed the scene quickly. "What's going on out here?" he asked, his voice carrying the natural authority of command. Before Diane could respond, Captain Davis's eyes fell on Terence. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by a genuine smile. "Commander Jackson?" he asked, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Alexander Davis, United States Air Force, retired. We met at that joint operation briefing in Bahrain back in 2018. Terence shifted Zora to his left arm so he could shake the captain's hand. "Captain Davis. Good to see you again, sir." The captain glanced around at his crew, quickly assessing the tension in the cabin. "Is there a problem here?" "There was a misunderstanding about Mr. Jackson's seating assignment," Diane explained hastily, "but it's been resolved." Captain Davis looked skeptical. "A misunderstanding about seating assignments required airport security?" "It's fine, Captain," Terence interjected, not wanting to prolong the scene for Zora's sake. "I believe everyone now understands where I belong." The emphasis on his final words wasn't lost on anyone present. Captain Davis studied Terence's face for a moment, then nodded slightly, one military man to another, an acknowledgement of battles chosen and battles deferred. "Well, Commander Jackson, it's an honor to have you on board," Captain Davis announced loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "If there's anything you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. We'll be departing shortly." With that, the captain returned to the cockpit, leaving behind a first-class cabin humming with whispered conversations and sidelong glances. The three flight attendants huddled near the galley, their body language radiating embarrassment and concern. Jessica kept glancing nervously toward Terence while Kyle appeared to be on the verge of tears. As Officer Reeves prepared to deplane, he leaned close to Terence. "Sir, would you like me to file a report about this incident?" Terence considered the question while gently rocking Zora, who had finally settled down. "Not at this time, officer. But thank you." As the security officer nodded and turned to leave, Terence wondered if he'd made the right decision. By not formally reporting the incident, was he allowing this behavior to continue unchallenged? But then again, he had a crying baby to care for, a sister recovering from surgery, and national security matters awaiting his attention in Atlanta. Some battles, as his father would say, were for another day. What he didn't realize was that this particular battle was just beginning, regardless of his decision to file a formal report. The young woman with the phone across the aisle had captured everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Davis," the intercom crackled. "We're experiencing a slight delay in our departure time. We should be underway in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare for crosscheck." As the announcement ended, Terrence finally managed to settle comfortably in his seat with baby Zora, who had exhausted herself from crying and had fallen back asleep. The cabin had grown unusually quiet, with most passengers either pretending to be absorbed in their devices or openly staring at him with newfound interest. The dramatic revelation of his identity had transformed him from an unwelcome intruder to a person of significance in the span of seconds. Jessica approached his seat, her previously condescending demeanor replaced with exaggerated deference. "Mr. Jackson, can I get you anything before takeoff? Perhaps some water or juice? Would you like a warm blanket for the little one?" "Some water would be fine, thank you," Terrence replied neutrally. "Of course, right away," Jessica responded with an overly bright smile. "And please let me say again how truly sorry I am for the misunderstanding earlier." Terrence merely nodded, choosing not to engage further. As Jessica hurried away, Kyle appeared, placing a premium amenity kit, extra pillows, and a selection of snacks on Terrence's tray table without being asked. "We've also arranged for a special meal for you, sir," Kyle explained nervously. "Chef's selection from our premium menu. No extra charge, of course." "That won't be necessary," Terrence replied. "I'm not hungry." "Right, of course," Kyle stammered, backing away awkwardly. "Just let us know if you change your mind." As the crew continued their excessive attempts at making amends, the young Asian woman who had been recording the incident unbuckled her seatbelt and approached Terrence's seat. She was professionally dressed in a tailored pantsuit, with an air of quiet confidence. "Excuse me," she said softly, mindful of the sleeping baby. "My name is Sophia Lin. I'm a civil rights attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative." She discreetly handed him a business card. "I hope you don't mind that I recorded what happened. I've seen this scenario play out too many times, though rarely with such a dramatic turn." Terrence accepted her card with a nod of thanks. "I appreciate your concern, Ms. Lin, but I haven't decided whether I want to pursue this matter formally." "I understand completely," Sophia replied. "But if you change your mind, that footage could be valuable. And regardless of your decision, I'd be happy to provide any guidance or resources." As Sophia returned to her seat, Terrence found himself reflecting on a conversation he'd had years ago with his mentor, Admiral Hayes. The Admiral, one of the few black men to reach his rank in the Navy, had pulled Terrence aside after he'd been selected for SEAL training. "Jackson," Hayes had said, "you're going to face situations where people question your right to be in the room. My advice? Always wear the uniform when you travel. Always carry your credentials prominently. It shouldn't be necessary, but it will save you heartache." At the time, Terrence had nodded respectfully while inwardly rejecting the idea that he should have to advertise his credentials to receive basic human dignity. Now, as he sat in first class with whispers circulating around him, he felt the bitter truth of Hayes' words. The respect he was now receiving wasn't based on his humanity but on his proximity to power. Terrence's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed, "POTUS Secure Line," indicating a call from the president himself. Several nearby passengers noticed the distinctive presidential seal on his phone screen, their eyes widening as Terrence answered. "Jackson," he said quietly, conscious of maintaining operational security in the public setting. "Terrence, just checking in on that security assessment for the Tokyo summit," the president's voice came through clearly. "Any updates before you go wheels up?" "All preparations are proceeding as scheduled, sir," Terrence replied professionally. "I'll have the final protocols on your desk by 0900 tomorrow." "Excellent. And how's the baby situation working out?" the president asked, his tone warming. "Amara told Michelle about your babysitting adventure when they spoke yesterday." Terrence couldn't help but smile slightly at the thought of the First Lady and his wife discussing his childcare abilities. It's been an education, sir. But we're managing. I bet you are. Safe travels, Terrence. Michelle sends her best to Amara. Thank you, Mr. President. As Terrence ended the call, he became aware that nearly everyone in the first-class cabin had been listening intently. Walter Briggs, who had been vocally supportive of Terrence's mistreatment earlier, now leaned across the aisle with an entirely different demeanor. "Excuse me, Mr. Jackson," he said with a deferential smile. Walter Briggs, Executive VP at Hamilton Financial. I couldn't help overhearing. You work directly with the president? That must be fascinating work. The same man who had questioned Terrence's right to occupy a first-class seat was now eagerly trying to establish a connection. The hypocrisy was not lost on Terrence. It has its moments, Terrence replied neutrally. I've done some advisory work with the Commerce Department, Walter continued, clearly hoping to establish common ground. Perhaps we've crossed paths at some point. I don't believe so, Terrence responded, his tone making it clear he wasn't interested in pursuing the conversation. Walter's smile faltered slightly before he pressed on. Well, I just wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. I wasn't suggesting that you didn't belong in first class. I was merely concerned about the baby disrupting the flight. Terrence fixed Walter with a steady gaze. It's interesting how that concern only applied to my baby, not to the infant traveling with the white couple in row 4. Walter glanced toward the front of the cabin where, indeed, a white couple with a baby had boarded without incident or comment. His face flushed as he struggled to formulate a response. I didn't notice. That is. Walter stammered. If you'll excuse me, Terrence said, effectively ending the conversation as he turned his attention back to Zora. The plane's engines began to rev up, but the aircraft remained stationary. Through the window, Terrence could see several airline representatives in suits hurrying toward the jet bridge. Moments later, Diane's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. We're waiting for some, administrative matters to be resolved. We should be underway shortly. Thank you for your patience. Terrence suspected that, administrative matters, meant airline executives had been notified of the incident involving a high-ranking government official. His suspicion was confirmed when Diane approached his seat again, her composure clearly shaken. Mr. Jackson, our Regional Director of Operations would like to speak with you before we depart. Would that be acceptable? Terrence glanced down at the sleeping Zora. As long as we can talk here. I don't want to disturb the baby. Diane nodded quickly. Of course, sir. He'll be boarding momentarily. As predicted, a harried-looking executive in a perfectly tailored suit boarded the plane seconds later. The regional director's apologies were profuse, his offers of compensation generous, but Terrence found himself feeling oddly detached from the interaction. All he could think about was how different his treatment would have been if he hadn't been carrying the government ID with the presidential seal. The question that kept circling in his mind as the plane finally taxied toward the runway wasn't about airline policy or staff training. It was much simpler and far more painful. Why did he need credentials to be treated like a human being? The Boeing 737 leveled off at 35,000 feet, the steady hum of the engines providing a soothing white noise that helped keep baby Zora asleep against Terrence's chest. The first hour of the 3-hour flight to Atlanta had passed in a tense silence, with the flight attendants performing their duties with mechanical efficiency while avoiding direct eye contact with Terrence. Jessica had transformed from condescending to servile, appearing at Terrence's side every 15 minutes to offer beverages, snacks, warm towels, and extra blankets. Each time, her smile seemed more strained, her apologies more desperate. Terrence accepted the necessary items politely but minimally, neither encouraging her excessive attentiveness nor explicitly rejecting it. Kyle, meanwhile, had adopted a strategy of overcompensation, becoming almost aggressively friendly not just to Terrence but to every passenger in the cabin. His laugh was too loud, his jokes too frequent, as if trying to create an atmosphere that would erase the memory of the pre-flight confrontation. As Terence gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below, his mind drifted back to his childhood in South Atlanta. Growing up in the predominantly black neighborhood of Pittsburgh, he'd been relatively sheltered from direct racism until his academic achievements earned him a scholarship to Woodward Academy, an elite private school in the affluent, mostly white area of College Park. His first day, at 14 years old, had been eye-opening. Despite his uniform being identical to those of his white classmates, security had stopped him at the entrance, questioning his presence until a teacher intervened. That pattern continued throughout his academic career and into his professional life, being questioned, stopped, scrutinized in spaces where his white counterparts moved freely. Zora stirred against his chest, making small mewling sounds that indicated she might wake soon. Terence adjusted her position slightly, remembering the detailed instructions his sister Jasmine had given him about holding her daughter. "Mr. Jackson," Diane approached, her voice now carefully modulated to sound respectful rather than authoritative. "I wanted to personally apologize again for the misunderstanding earlier." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Terence replied calmly. "It was an assumption." "Several assumptions, actually." Diane's professional smile faltered. "I assure you, it had nothing to do with race." Terence completed her sentence. "It had everything to do with race, combined with gender and the fact that I was caring for an infant. You saw a black man in casual clothes holding a baby in first class, and you immediately decided I didn't belong there. That's not. We would have questioned anyone who seemed out of place," Diane protested weakly. "Yet you didn't question the white couple with an infant in row 4. You didn't ask to see additional ID from the white businessman in sweatpants in row 1. Only me." Terence kept his voice low and controlled, mindful of the sleeping baby and the listening passengers. Before Diane could respond, Terence's phone rang again. Looking at the screen, he saw it was Amara, his wife. "Excuse me," he said to Diane, effectively dismissing her as he answered the call. "Hey," he said softly, a genuine smile warming his face for the first time since boarding. "How's it going with baby duty?" Amara asked, her voice carrying the slight lilt of her Nigerian heritage even after 20 years in America. As a pediatric surgeon at Emory University Hospital, she was intimately familiar with childcare but had been caught in emergency surgery when Jasmine had her medical crisis. "It's been eventful," Terence replied, his tone conveying more than his words. Amara, attuned to the nuances of her husband's voice after 12 years of marriage, immediately picked up on his tension. "What happened? Is Zora okay?" "Zora's fine, just sleeping. But there was an incident during boarding. The usual assumptions about where I belong." Amara's sigh carried through the phone, weighted with the familiar burden of these recurring indignities. "Tell me." As Terence quietly recounted the confrontation, Amara's responses shifted from resigned understanding to simmering anger. "You need to file a formal complaint," she insisted when he finished. "This can't keep happening, Terence." "It's not worth the energy," he replied, echoing the pragmatic approach he'd adopted over years of similar encounters. "It is worth it," Amara countered firmly. "Not just for you, but for everyone who doesn't have a presidential seal on their ID to protect them. Your position gives you a platform. Use it." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from the plane's satellite phone. Diane approached again, this time with a cordless handset. "Mr. Jackson, I apologize for the intrusion, but the airline's customer experience director is on the line and would like to speak with you." Terence said goodbye to Amara, promising to call when he landed, and accepted the handset. The conversation with the airline executive was predictable. Profuse apologies, offers of lifetime status upgrades, promises of thorough staff retraining. Terence listened politely, made non-committal responses, and returned the phone to Diane. As the flight progressed, Terence noticed a young black man being escorted from economy to an empty first-class seat. The passenger, who appeared to be in his early 20s and was dressed in a Howard University sweatshirt, looked confused by the unexpected upgrade. Jessica explained loudly enough for Terence to hear, we're dealing with an overbooking situation in economy. You've been randomly selected for a complimentary upgrade. Terrence had flown enough to know that mid-flight upgrades for overbooking were virtually non-existent. This was clearly damage control, an attempt to demonstrate that the airline did indeed allow black passengers in first class. Once the young man was settled in his new seat, Terrence introduced himself. "Rough day in economy?" "Not really," the young man replied with a bemused smile. "The flight wasn't even full back there." "I'm Marcus, by the way." "Marcus Johnson." "Terrence Jackson. Pleasure to meet you." As they talked, Marcus revealed he was a senior computer science major returning from a tech conference in D.C. He'd saved for months to attend the conference but had purchased the cheapest economy ticket possible. "Then suddenly they're moving me up here," Marcus laughed. "Not that I'm complaining, but it was weird how insistent they were." Terrence nodded, deciding to be transparent. "That might have something to do with me." He briefly explained the boarding incident, watching understanding dawn on Marcus's face. "Man, that sounds familiar," Marcus said, shaking his head. "Last month I was presenting my research at MIT, and security stopped me 3 times in one day. Kept asking to see my visitor's badge, even though I was wearing it. Meanwhile, my white classmates walked right through without being questioned once." Their conversation continued, moving from shared experiences of discrimination to Marcus's research in artificial intelligence ethics. Terrence found himself impressed by the young man's insights and offered to connect him with contacts at several tech firms with government contracts. Across the aisle, Sophia Lynn continued working on her laptop, occasionally making notes that Terrence suspected related to the incident she had recorded. Walter Briggs had fallen into a sullen silence after his failed attempt at networking, while the other first-class passengers alternated between stealing glances at Terrence and pretending not to notice him at all. As the flight began its initial descent into Atlanta, Terrence reflected on the day's events. What should have been a simple journey home had become yet another reminder of the burden he carried simply by existing in spaces where others felt he didn't belong. The presidential seal on his ID had granted him reprieve today, but what about tomorrow? What about Marcus and countless others who didn't have such powerful symbols to shield them? Baby Zora stirred and opened her eyes, looking up at Terrence with the innocent curiosity of infancy. In her gaze, he saw no judgment, no preconceptions, just pure human connection. It struck him then that perhaps this incident, painful as it was, might serve a greater purpose if he chose to use his platform rather than simply enduring yet another indignity in silence. As the plane descended through the clouds toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Terrence made a decision. This time would be different. This time, he would speak up. The aircraft touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with a slight bump, the tires squealing against the runway before the reverse thrusters engaged. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Terrence noticed something unusual through his window, a cluster of people waiting on the tarmac, some with professional cameras, others holding up smartphones. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta," Captain Davis announced over the intercom. "The local time is 4:35 p.m., and the temperature is 76 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the fasten seatbelt sign has been turned off." Diane approached Terrence's seat, her professional demeanor now tinged with evident anxiety. "Mr. Jackson, I've just been informed that there are media representatives waiting at the gate. It appears that the incident during boarding has gained some attention on social media." Terrence glanced across the aisle at Sophia, who was putting away her laptop. She met his gaze with an apologetic shrug. "I didn't post the video," she said. "But other passengers might have shared what they witnessed." Checking his own phone as the plane reached the gate, Terrence saw that he had 27 missed calls, 46 text messages, and over 100 email notifications. Opening Twitter, he saw that #RespectNotCredentials was trending nationally, with snippets of video showing the confrontation before his ID reveal. Mr. Jackson, Captain Davis had emerged from the cockpit and approached Terrence's seat. Airport security has offered to escort you through a private exit if you prefer to avoid the media. Terrence considered the offer while gently securing Zora in her carrier. The baby had awakened and was looking around with wide, curious eyes, unaware of the storm brewing around her. "Thank you, Captain, but I'll exit normally," Terrence decided. "Running would only suggest I have something to hide." "I don't." As the passengers began to disembark, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Jessica and Kyle stationed themselves as far from the exit door as possible, clearly hoping to avoid being captured on camera. Walter Briggs and several other first-class passengers who had witnessed or participated in Terrence's mistreatment hurried off without making eye contact. Marcus, the Howard University student who had been upgraded mid-flight, paused beside Terrence's seat. "Man, this is wild," he said, showing Terrence his phone screen displaying the viral hashtag. "You need backup out there?" Terrence appreciated the young man's solidarity. "I think I'll be okay, but thanks." Sophia handed Terrence a note with her direct number scribbled on it. "Call me if you need legal counsel or just someone to help navigate this. Media attention can be overwhelming, especially when it's unexpected." Adjusting the baby carrier and gathering his minimal luggage, Terrence was the last passenger to exit the aircraft. As he stepped into the jet bridge, the sounds of camera shutters and overlapping questions immediately assaulted him. "Mr. Jackson, can you comment on your treatment aboard Flight 2376? Sir, is it true the flight attendants tried to remove you from first class? Did the airline staff apologize after seeing your government credentials?" Terrence maintained his composure, neither rushing nor stopping to address the questions. As he entered the terminal, he saw his sister Jasmine waiting anxiously, her face pale and drawn from her recent surgery but her eyes blazing with protective fury. "Terrence!" she called out, pushing past a reporter to reach him. "Are you okay? Is Zora all right?" "We're both fine," he assured her, carefully transferring the baby carrier to her waiting arms. "How did you know to meet us here? And should you even be out of bed?" "It's all over the news," Jasmine explained, her voice tight with anger. "Some passenger posted a video of those flight attendants harassing you. It went viral while you were in the air." She gestured to her abdomen. "And I'm fine. The doctor said walking is good for recovery." As they tried to make their way through the terminal, more cameras and microphones appeared. Airport security officers moved in to create a path for them, but the press followed persistently. "Mr. Jackson. National civil rights organizations are calling for a boycott of the airline. Do you support this action?" "Sir, the airline's CEO has issued an emergency statement promising a thorough investigation. Your response?" At the arrival's curb, Terrence spotted Amara waiting beside their Tesla Model Y, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. When she saw him, she rushed forward, embracing him tightly before examining his face with the keen assessment of both a doctor and a loving spouse. "You're not fine," she stated simply. "I can see it in your eyes." Before he could respond, another wave of reporters approached. Terrence guided Amara, Jasmine, and baby Zora toward their vehicle, using his body to shield them from the cameras. "Mr. Jackson," called out a reporter from CNN, the White House press secretary was asked about this incident in the afternoon briefing. "She said the president is deeply concerned and will be speaking with you personally. Can you confirm?" This revelation caught Terrence by surprise. The incident had escalated far beyond what he'd anticipated. As a security professional who valued privacy and discretion, being thrust into the national spotlight was deeply uncomfortable, especially since it might impact his effectiveness in a role that often required anonymity. Once they were safely in the car with doors closed, Amara turned to him. "This is bigger than just one bad experience, Terrence. You know that, right?" "I know," he acknowledged, his voice heavy with the responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't ethically ignore. "But right now, let's get Jasmine and Zora home. They've been through enough today." As Amara drove away from the airport, Terrence's phone rang again. The screen displayed, "POTUS secure line." "I need to take this," he said, answering the call. "Yes, Mr. President." Terrence, the president's voice was both warm with personal concern and serious with official gravity. "I've been briefed on what happened. I'm sorry you experienced that. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, sir," Terrence replied professionally. "Though I admit I didn't expect the media attention." The press secretary was blindsided by questions about it, the president explained. "That video has been viewed several million times already. I've directed the White House counsel to reach out to the airline's legal team directly. This kind of discrimination is unacceptable." "I appreciate that, sir," Terrence said, aware of his family listening intently. "But I'd prefer to handle this privately if possible." "Of course," the president agreed. "But I want you to know that you have my full support in whatever approach you choose to take. This isn't just about you, Terrence. It's about addressing a systemic problem." After the call ended, Terrence looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline growing closer. His carefully constructed life, balanced between high-level government service and private family time, had been upended in the span of a few hours. The presidential seal on his ID had protected him from mistreatment on the plane, but it had also thrust him into a spotlight he'd never sought. As they drove home in silence, Terrence contemplated his next steps. The incident would require a response, the question was what kind. Should he pursue formal action against the airline? Speak publicly about his experience? Use his platform to advocate for broader change? Or try to retreat back into the privacy he valued? By the time they reached their Cascade Heights home, one thing had become clear: regardless of what he decided, there would be no returning to the way things were before he boarded that flight. 2 days after the flight incident, Terrence sat in the sunlit home office of his Atlanta residence, staring at the multiple screens displaying various aspects of the growing media storm. Outside, a small gathering of reporters remained camped at the end of his driveway, despite the upscale neighborhood's increased security patrols. On one screen, the airline's CEO was giving his third press conference in 48 hours. "We have suspended the crew members involved pending a thorough investigation. This incident does not reflect our company's values of inclusion and respect." Another screen showed social media metrics. The original video had been viewed over 20 million times, with #RespectNotCredentials trending globally for the second straight day. Civil rights organizations were organizing boycotts, while black professionals across industries were sharing similar experiences of being questioned or challenged in first-class cabins, executive lounges, and other exclusive spaces. A third screen displayed an encrypted message from the White House Chief of Staff. "POTUS supportive of whatever direction you choose. For national security considerations, we can help minimize public exposure if preferred. Alternatively, WH willing to back public stance. Your call." Amara entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee, her hospital scrubs replaced by casual weekend attire. She placed one mug beside Terrence and perched on the edge of his desk. "The airline's lawyers called again," she informed him. "They've increased their settlement offer to 7 figures, but still insist on a non-disclosure agreement." Terrence sighed, rubbing his temples. "Of course they do. They want this to disappear." "And what do you want?" Amara asked, her voice gentle but direct. Before he could answer, his secure phone rang. The display indicated it was a conference call with several government officials, including the White House counsel and the Director of National Intelligence. "Jackson," he answered, putting the call on speaker since Amara had the same security clearance due to her occasional work with the Surgeon General's office. "Terrence," began the White House counsel, "we're calling to discuss options regarding the airline incident. From a national security perspective, there are concerns about your continued public exposure. Your role requires a certain level of anonymity for effectiveness." "I understand that," Terrence acknowledged. "That said," continued the Director of National Intelligence, "the President was explicit that this decision remains entirely yours. If you choose to pursue this matter publicly, the administration will support you. If you prefer to handle it privately, we can help facilitate that as well. After the call ended, Amara studied her husband's troubled expression. They want you to let it go, don't they? For national security reasons. They didn't say that explicitly, Terence replied. But yes, I think some of them would prefer I take the settlement and sign the NDA. And what about the thousands of people who've been sharing their own stories of discrimination since your video went viral? Amara challenged. What happens to their momentum if you suddenly go silent? The question hung in the air as Terence's personal phone rang. The caller ID showed Jasmine Sell. Hey, sis, he answered. How are you feeling? Better than yesterday, Jasmine replied. Zora's been asking for her uncle, though. Terence smiled at the obvious fabrication, given that Zora was 3 months old and not yet talking. Tell her I'll visit soon. Have you decided what you're going to do about the airline situation? Jasmine asked, getting straight to the point. Not yet. There are complications. There always are, Jasmine said. But let me tell you something. Dad would have a very clear opinion about this. The mention of their father, Franklin Jackson. A civil rights activist who had marched with Dr. King before becoming one of Atlanta's first black city council members, struck a chord. Franklin had passed away 5 years earlier, but his principles remained a guiding force in Terence's life. He would say that responsibility increases with privilege, Terence acknowledged, recalling his father's frequent refrain. Exactly, Jasmine confirmed. He didn't raise us to accept injustice, even when fighting it comes at a personal cost. After ending the call with his sister, Terence received an unexpected request for a video meeting from Marcus Johnson, the Howard University student he'd met on the flight. Curious, he accepted. Marcus appeared on screen from what looked like a dorm room, surrounded by several other young black students. Mr. Jackson, sorry to bother you, but we wanted to show you something. The camera panned to reveal dozens of students gathered in what appeared to be a common area, many holding signs with the hashtag respect not credentials and messages like, our humanity is not up for debate, and, dignity shouldn't require ID. Your experience sparked something important here, Marcus explained earnestly. We're organizing similar demonstrations at universities across the country. People are finally listening to stories we've been trying to tell for years. Touched by the students' passion and initiative, Terence thanked them for sharing their plans. After ending the call, he turned to find Amara watching him with knowing eyes. You've made your decision, haven't you? She asked. I think I have, Terence confirmed. That afternoon, Terence arranged a meeting at his home with several key figures, Sophia Lynn, the civil rights attorney who had recorded the incident. 2 senior black officials from other government agencies who had reached out with their support, and surprisingly, Walter Briggs, the businessman from the flight who had requested the opportunity to speak with Terence. Walter arrived looking significantly less confident than he had on the plane. Mr. Jackson, thank you for agreeing to see me. I want to apologize personally for my behavior during the flight. There's no excuse for how I acted. You're right, there isn't, Terence replied evenly. But I appreciate you coming here to say that in person rather than through some publicist. Walter nodded uncomfortably. The thing is, watching that video of myself, seeing how I behaved, it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own biases. I've spent the past 2 days thinking about nothing else. And what conclusions have you reached? Terence asked. That I've been part of the problem, Walter admitted. I've spent my career believing I judge people solely on merit, but my immediate reaction to seeing you in first class proved otherwise. He hesitated before continuing. I'd like to be part of the solution, if you're willing to tell me how. The conversation continued as Sophia and the government officials arrived. Together, they discussed various approaches to addressing not just this specific incident but the broader pattern it represented. Later that evening, as the group departed, Terence received another call from the president. I understand you've been meeting with quite the diverse coalition today, the president remarked. Word travels fast, Terrence observed. In Washington? Always, the president chuckled before turning serious. Terrence, I want to be clear about something. Whatever you decide to do here, you have my personal support. Not just as your commander-in-chief, but as someone who values your judgment and integrity. I appreciate that, sir, Terrence replied. I believe I've reached a decision. And what will you do? The president asked. Looking across the room at Amara, who had stood by him through every challenge in their life together, Terrence felt a sense of clarity that had been missing since the incident began. I'm going to speak up, he answered firmly. Not just for myself, but for everyone who doesn't have a presidential seal to protect them. The president was silent for a moment before responding. I thought you might say that. For what it's worth, I think it's the right call. Sometimes our greatest service isn't in the shadows, but in the light. After ending the call, Terrence crossed the room to embrace his wife. This won't be easy, he warned. Few important things are, Amara replied, holding him tightly. But you won't be standing alone. As night fell over Atlanta, Terrence drafted an email declining the airline settlement offer and rejecting their non-disclosure agreement. Whatever came next would be challenging, but for the first time since the incident, he felt certain of his path forward. The presidential seal had given him protection in a moment of discrimination, but it was his father's principles that would guide him through what lay ahead. Some battles, as Franklin Jackson had taught him, were worth fighting in the open, not just for personal vindication, but for the possibility of creating meaningful change. 1 week after the flight incident, Terrence stood at a podium in the Atlanta Press Club, cameras flashing as he prepared to make his first public statement. Unlike his casual appearance on the flight, today he wore his full military dress uniform, complete with the numerous medals and commendations he'd earned during his distinguished Navy SEAL career. The visual statement was deliberate. A reminder that respect shouldn't depend on uniforms or credentials, while simultaneously making it impossible to dismiss his accomplishments. Amara sat in the front row beside Jasmine, who held baby Zora. Behind them were Marcus Johnson and several Howard University students, Walter Briggs, Sophia Lynn, and representatives from various civil rights organizations. Captain Alexander Davis had also requested to attend, out of uniform and on his own time, as a show of personal support. Terrence adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the cameras. 7 days ago, I boarded a flight as just another passenger trying to get home with my niece. What happened next has sparked a national conversation about dignity, respect, and the credentials we shouldn't need to be treated as human beings. He recounted the events on the plane without embellishment, his measured tone conveying the dignity that had never left him even during the most humiliating moments of the confrontation. When the flight attendant saw the presidential seal on my ID, everything changed. Suddenly, I was worthy of respect. Suddenly, I belonged, Terrence continued. But here's the truth, I was exactly the same person before they saw that ID. The only thing that changed was their perception of my value. Pausing, he looked at his family before continuing. I've spent my career serving this country, first in the military, now in government. I believe in America's potential to be a place where everyone is treated with equal dignity. But we aren't there yet, as my experience and countless others demonstrate daily. Terrence then outlined the actions he would be taking. Filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation, declining the airline settlement offer, and establishing a foundation to combat discrimination in transportation services. This foundation will provide legal resources to those who experience similar discrimination but don't have the platform or protection that my position afforded me, he explained. Because dignity shouldn't require credentials. In the months that followed, the impact of Terrence's decision rippled outward in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The airline, facing immense public pressure and the prospect of regulatory scrutiny, announced comprehensive changes to their training programs. The new anti-bias curriculum, developed in consultation with civil rights experts, would be named the Credentials Not Required Initiative, a direct reference to Terrence's experience. Jessica, Kyle, and Diane were permanently removed from passenger service. While Diane filed a countersuit claiming defamation, it was quickly dismissed when multiple passengers came forward with similar stories of discriminatory treatment they'd experienced under her supervision. 6 months after the incident, Terrence stood in a community center in South Atlanta, where his newly established foundation was hosting its first training session for transportation industry employees. The room was filled with airline staff, rideshare drivers, train conductors, and bus operators, all there to learn about recognizing and addressing implicit bias. Our goal isn't punishment, Terrence explained to the attendees. It's transformation. We all carry biases shaped by our experiences and the messages we've absorbed from society. The question isn't whether we have these biases, it's whether we're willing to recognize and challenge them. To everyone's surprise, Walter Briggs had become one of the Foundation's most significant donors and vocal advocates. His honest reckoning with his own behavior had led to a genuine commitment to change, both personally and within his corporate influence. "I was that guy," Walter admitted in his speech at the Foundation's launch event. "The one making assumptions, the one contributing to someone else's humiliation." Facing that truth was uncomfortable, but necessary. "If I can change, anyone can." Sophia Lynn, meanwhile, had used Terrence's case as precedent in representing multiple instances of similar discrimination. Her legal advocacy, combined with the media attention surrounding Terrence's story, had created a powerful deterrent effect throughout the transportation industry. In Washington, Terrence's experience had inspired congressional hearings on discrimination in commercial transportation, leading to new legislation strengthening passengers' rights and establishing clearer consequences for discriminatory treatment. The president had incorporated elements of these protections into an executive order requiring federal employees to receive similar training. Nearly a year after the incident, Terrence and Amara hosted baby Zora's first birthday party in their backyard. As family and friends gathered to celebrate, Terrence found himself reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past 12 months. Marcus Johnson, now a graduate student and part-time consultant for the Foundation, approached with a slice of cake. "I got accepted to that internship program you recommended," he shared excitedly. "Thank you for the recommendation." "You earned it on your own merit," Terrence assured him. "I just opened a door. You walked through it." Later, as the party wound down, Terrence received a call informing him of his promotion to an even more senior position overseeing security coordination across multiple agencies, a role that would allow him to implement systemic changes from within the government while continuing his advocacy work. The following week, Terrence boarded another flight to Washington. This time, as he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed something different. The flight attendants greeted him with genuine respect, not because they recognized him from the news or knew of his government position, but because they had been through the training his foundation had helped develop. As the plane taxied for takeoff, a young black woman with a toddler was directed to the first-class seat across from him. The flight attendant helped her stow her bags and get settled with the same courtesy extended to every passenger. It was a small moment, unremarkable in how it should always have been, yet profound in what it represented. Terrence smiled as he looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline receding below. The presidential seal had created a moment of reckoning, but it was the collective commitment to change that was creating lasting impact. There was still much work to be done, many battles yet to fight, but today, in this moment, progress was visible and real. As his father had always taught him, justice isn't just about changing laws. It's about changing hearts and minds. The journey toward that change continued, one interaction, one policy, one transformed perspective at a time. This powerful story reminds us that dignity should never depend on credentials or status. True respect is a fundamental human right, not a privilege reserved for those with impressive titles or connections. When we judge others based on appearance rather than character, we perpetuate harmful systems that diminish us all. Terrence's journey shows that sometimes standing up against discrimination requires personal sacrifice. By refusing the easy path of silence and settlement, he created lasting change that benefited countless others. His experience demonstrates how systemic racism operates, not always through overt hatred, but through assumptions, microaggressions, and different standards of treatment. The transformation of Walter Briggs proves that meaningful change is possible when people confront their biases honestly. Similarly, the airline's comprehensive training initiative shows how accountability can lead to institutional improvement. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights our collective responsibility. Change happens when witnesses speak up, when leaders use their platforms, when organizations take responsibility, and when individuals examine their own behaviors. The presidential seal revealed biases that were always present, but addressing those biases requires all of us to recognize the inherent dignity in every person, regardless of appearance or status. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated differently based on how they looked, only to see attitudes change when their status was revealed? Or have you been on the receiving end of such treatment? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story about overcoming racial discrimination moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives that expose injustice and celebrate resilience. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the daily reality of racism that many face, even in seemingly ordinary situations like boarding a plane. Thank you for joining our community dedicated to recognizing everyone's inherent dignity and worth. Together, we can create a world where respect isn't determined by credentials, but freely given to all as their natural right.